Professor, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Adrian. Well, I'll start again. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, great to see everybody.
Before the class starts, I have like a little emergency. I'm still gonna be in class today, but I don't know if I'm gonna be in and out. I just caught a flat on my tire. I'm stuck on the side of the highway.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so just in case if any phone calls or anything gets interrupted, I will be coming right back into class.
Okay. I appreciate that, Joshua, but just be careful being with a flat on the side of the road, okay?
No problem. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody else. Great to see your faces and your names. That's what I was saying when it was mute. And good to be back together. I was saying I hope folks are staying dry, and I hope Joshua is staying safe where he's at with his flat tire. And so we're going to begin today. Just to let you know, if you see the Gregory iPhone is not a new student joining us in the middle of the semester. It's a professor who is just visiting our class today. So we should proceed with our business as usual. So I'm going to start first. Thank you all who got your Google is making the stupid essays in. I'm going to speak a little bit about that one. I want to look at, applaud the submissions, because I think the work we did by scaffolding the thesis statement, those assignments we did to build that, and then building the essay off of that, there seems to be a lot more clarity and a lot more organization with the essay. So I could say the ones that have been submitted have been quite good. So I'm excited about that. So that encourages the rest of you. And so what I thought we could do today is at the beginning, I just wanted to, and we'll do a part 2 and a part 3 to this, is look at some of the introductions. And I can tell you that by me having seen the rest of them, that the organization and the rest of the essay follows the introductions. But I'm going to pull up 3 of them, and we're going to take a look at those. The part 2 and the part 3, after we look at these, is that I will open up another session on Friday. So if anybody wants to come and be a part of the live session, that's when we come together the last time. I think some of you who showed up and brought your papers, and we got to talk, or set up a time to talk during that time, so we can review my corrections. But we'll open up another session on Friday for a couple of hours. And then the part 3 of all of this is that we will then do a more follow-up on specific questions and general questions in the next class, so that you can be prepared for your next formal essay, which is due in about a week and a half. So all of those steps for this one, which we're going to begin now with the Google. Then we'll take a look at your assignment with White Rage. And so I want to thank you all as well for submitting your assignments. And what I am going to do with that, we'll review some of them, and I've pulled out some of your responses as I do, so that we could look at what some of your classmates have said. Of course, if you're curious, you can go right onto Blackboard and check out your classmates' responses. And then we're going to talk about next steps. And the next steps regarding both last week's essay and the essay we read today, and the next formal essay, which is a prompt based off of those. All right, any questions? Okay. Lang, Miguel, everybody's okay. Those are the ones I could see.
So I have a question.
Yes,
good afternoon. I think I upload my essay, but I think I uploaded in the wrong link. I think so. I'm not sure.
the Google one?
Yeah, the Google one. Yes.
Yeah, the Google one. Yeah, because I didn't see yours. And Jalan, I saw yours because you had emailed it, so I have yours, even though it's not on the link.
Yeah. Can I? Because I didn't see the link that you post, so I uploaded in another one.
Okay. Yeah, if you could put it into that one, that would be great. That would be good. So it's in the same place.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and then I just want to look at some of the introductions that we did, that you all did actually. Here we go, share screen. Yeah, so the prompt was asking us to identify ways in which Google and or the internet was affecting people, right? And this is based off the article. And so I think one of the things I was encouraged by the essays in general was that folks were sticking to the essay. And that's one of the things that we've been working on, trying to have a response, the distinction between having your own personal response or your own ideas, which are valid, but being able to read the text and respond in relationship to what the author is speaking about. So let's look at here. I'm going to make this a little bigger for all of you. Increase it so you can see it better. And I'm going to make us small over here so we can see more of the screen. So here's one of the first paragraphs. So it says, Google is a powerful search engine that people use on the daily to get information in shorter time frame. I'm going to say these are unedited, right? So I'm just popping them in. Not only that, but the internet itself has effects on people that can really change the way we operate. In the article, Google is making us stupid. Is Google making us stupid? Nicholas Carr talks about the way life has changed since everyone uses the internet by affecting the ability of how we read books, not being able to concentrate, and it's the prime source of information. So let's look at this one here. Any reactions or thoughts to this opening paragraph, this introduction? Does it sound clear? Can you identify the thesis statement? What's your thoughts? No thoughts? Nobody wants to take a stab at it? Jalan, or no, Jalan, you have issues with your mic, right? Yeah, okay. Falang. Shake your head. All right. Well, one of the things we were talking about in the prompt was we were talking about how it affects people, right? And so in a way, we can see right here toward the end, the student goes, this last paragraph reads as a thesis statement, because they begin talking about the way the way that the author is talking about the way life changes since everyone uses the internet by affecting how we read books, right? Not being able to concentrate, and that it being the primary source of information, right? So these are three ways in which it is affecting us. Now, so this is a short, concise introduction, it kind of just makes it, right? Because it gives us a thesis, and even though there's only 2 more sentences that kind of give us context to the article, that the information is basically the main ideas that are in there. It could use a little more context, because remember, when we do the introduction, we have to pretend that it's not to me, who has read the article, etc., but that it's to someone who hasn't. So you have to be able to give it context. But it does hit the other points, right? Because the 4 points it has to hit, has to name the article, has to name the author, has to have a thesis statement, and at least a 2 or 3 sentence synopsis. So this kind of squeaks in there. All right, let's take a look at another one. This one says, in the article, is Google making us stupid? Nicholas Carr is about how the internet is causing people all over the world to not have a long attention span, to never take time and think deeply about an answer, and to always rely on the internet, and to never try to find something out on your own. So this has a huge effect on our society, because people just go on the internet to find answers, whether it is homework assignments, tests, and quizzes. Google has been an effect to us for a really long time, and people do not take time to think about anything more, but instead rely on the internet to give them answers. This has to change, because technology could be taken away one day and people will know no information. This one, anyone want to give this one a shot? I'll pause a moment.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Samantha.
Good afternoon, everyone. So honestly, I think it's pretty good. The only thing is that I feel like it's too much information in the beginning, where there's certain parts like where it's being explained should be in the next paragraphs.
Like what? If you can you see it?
So basically you see how they say it's about how internet is causing people all over the world to not have a long attention span, to never take time and think deeply about the answer, and to always rely on the internet and never try to find something out on your own. That's giving me kind of thesis statement vibes. But
Yes.
then they go on to basically explain like Google has an effect for us for a very long time now. People do not take time to think about everything anymore. That's kind of like explaining what your thesis statement is in the introduction.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is a good point. And you're right to pick up on the thesis statement vibes up here, right? Because we were saying we're playing with the idea of the thesis sentence, remember? So I could feel that person pushing the idea of trying to cram these ideas in one, but you're right to pick up on it, because this is, and we can see how the thesis statement could be at the beginning, doesn't have to be at the end, or it can be in the middle. There's no rule, but it has to be able to work with the paragraph. And I think that, I think what Samantha's pointing out, that, you know, that this, the sentence starts to talk about some of the specifics, but so we're trying to balance out, how do you give the context of the article, right, without going into the detail and the explanation. But you know, this one is you know, it's you know, in my opinion, is not bad. It's pretty good. It hits the thesis point. It's working the attempt. The one thing that would beware is this last sentence, right? The time this has to change, because technology could be taken away one day and people will know no information, right? I can almost see in the article where that is, right? I mean, they're talking about if there's like a power shortage or something, then we don't have access to the information if that's the only source and where we rely upon it. So I think it would have to be a little more specific, but in that sentence is the only thing that I see a little bit of the of sliding into the personal opinion or observation that may not necessarily come directly from the article. But otherwise, you know, it hits a lot of the marks that we need. And okay, here's this other one. I think I have to move this one because it's long, longer than the other two. And just fix that again because they had it centered. Okay. So nowadays, we are fortunate to have a wealth of information at our fingertips. The internet and Google have transformed the way in which we gather information, learn about the latest news stories, research products before making purchases, communicate with another, and much more. At first glance, the convenience of the internet seems like a positive and productive addition to our lives. However, one must question if this convenience comes at a cost. The article Is Google Making Us Stupid by Nicholas Carr brings to light the possible negative side effects of Google and the internet. Carr explains that the internet is changing the way in which people read, think, and communicate. Our brains are being altered and reprogrammed by the internet, affecting our cognition. Carr suggests that these changes influence everyone, regardless of one's profession, education level, or intelligence. As explained by Carr, the internet and Google are affecting people's ability to concentrate. It is changing the way we read and think, and the internet is modifying our minds to become more machine-like. Okay. Let me just make it just a little smaller so it can fit here on one screen. Thoughts about this introduction? Jalan, you're raising your hand. Yes.
I thought that I like the intro. It explains that internet may be a positive influence now, but probably in the future, and thanks to the article, it can show that these types of situations on Google or the internet can make us stupid, or not stupid, make us lose our knowledge, because mostly books and other things help us increase our knowledge, while technology mostly decreases it.
Well,
And
go ahead. Yeah, continue, Jalan.
so my personal opinion is that, like, the intro helps me explain how the world is evolving through technology, but in the meantime, like, other things that can give us knowledge, like books or school, those are going downhill because technology is giving us the answers for us, not looking for the answers on our own. Because mostly looking up the answers on our own without technology helps us challenge our brain. It helps us get smarter by overcoming every challenge. But thanks to the internet, it's becoming more easier for people to look up answers and thus losing their knowledge.
Well, I think that's the point you're making that I love about it is looking at both sides of it, how this in particular introduction does that. It looks at both sides, like saying it could be positive, but it could be negative. And that I think could be general knowledge, but we also know that is couched inside of the article, right? And so I want us to be clear that a lot of the times that we're thinking human beings, right? So of course we think things and we know things, and we come with a whole bunch of information into the classroom, and we're learning like a particular skill and how we can focus on the article itself. So what I want to say, Jalan, from your response is that to be conscious of, what we're pulling from the article. And in this case, this introduction does that, right? It has its own organization. And you were saying that, at the beginning, it talks more broadly, kind of has a broader, and then it starts narrowing down when it lands on the thesis statement, at the very end. And you can see that the ways affecting people, literally it says affecting people's ability to, and then it lists a few examples. It names the author and the article is in there. We get a context of what the article is about. So, I think a lot of the difference between this one and the one before, and with Samantha's response, was that to be aware of what information might be repetitive or repeated. And this one, we could clean it up a little bit. There's a line here, but it's not a deal breaker. Here, our brains are being altered, reprogrammed by the internet, affecting our cognitive. Here, the one before, Carr explains in which people read, think, and communicate. So it's kind of starts leading toward the thesis statement, and the thesis statement just fleshes it out more. So just be aware of like what information you need in the introduction, like too much or too little, right? That to be as concise as possible. And really, as I think Samantha was alluding to or saying, that basically one of the places to develop and flesh out those ideas are in the body paragraphs. I'm going to lower Jalan's hand. Samantha, is that your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. Honestly speaking, I think the big thing with an essay is the fact that you have to do 3 pages or essay in general, and people like babble on it, like just trying to like get it out, when it's kind of like when you start the introduction, you should already know what you're doing for the other paragraphs, because that's where the thesis statement comes in. You're going to bring up, let's say, one thing you're talking about, that's going to be the second paragraph. Then the next thing you're talking about, that's the third paragraph. Then you just got to conclude it. So it's more of like overthinking and then over putting things like in the introduction that kind of makes it stretch out to where it doesn't need to be.
Well, that's what you have to be aware of, right? That the point of it is not to stretch it out, right? That the point of the introduction is to introduce the essay, and that you include the information that you need. And we always try to hit 4 points, right? Repeating them. But if you're doing it on a particular article, that you're naming the article and the author, those things are included. That you have at least a 2 or 3 sentence, like minimum synopsis. If you need to say a little more, if you like the last one, kind of created a whole rationale, which is perfectly fine, right? And was well written, well stated. You could do that. And then, and of course, include the thesis statement. So I think the warning that I'm going to take from Samantha is that as we're constructing our introductions, that we be conscious of the information, to include the information we need, and not to create filler. I'm going to add not to be repetitive when you're writing in your introduction, and then that your body paragraphs are the places that you can expand and focus and say more about each of the ideas or each of the topics or each of the things that you're doing. And Victor is in the chat, is congratulate Victor for Gregory sake is our SIP tutor, is also speaking, encouraging Samantha in the chat. But I'm just checking out the chat. Yeah, excellent. All right. Good. And I'm just looking at some of the responses in the chat. Okay, good. Excellent. So great. Thanks for your encouragement in the chat and for your participation in the chat. Yeah, so we can see I'm encouraged by many of the papers that I'm reading, and I want you to be encouraged too, not because I'm encouraged, but because we can start seeing progress through the different activities that we do. All right, so again, thanks for your getting your assignments in for the White Rage article, and we're gonna do that. So it's interesting. Let's parallel what we were just talking about, right? There's certain benefits, right, to the internet, and so part of your assignment, without me saying go research, right, was to do some research. And so if we think back to the beginning articles we read, right, like how to get our minds to read, right? It's one of the things that was important about reading was not only vocabulary, right, and context, but also like historical context, like bringing in general knowledge. Because very often writers write and they don't explain every single detail, like they don't spell out every single reference. And so we've encountered that, right, with the article we read last week, with the essay, The Introduction to the Fire This Time. And then this week's article, they kind of go together because it's an essay that was inside of that anthology. So, in it, these writers are talking about historical references, and many times we have a general sense of what they mean. But I wanted us to be clear because I think the writers are making very strong assertions and making and expressing very clear ideas that they want to do. Very strong ideas that I think affect us, but they're making a case, right? They're not talking about just a feeling we have or an experience that's going on. They're talking about a historical context of specifically in this case racism or racial profiling. So they're talking about these things in a historical context. And I felt that it was important for us in order for us to dive into these ideas and to dive into these articles, that we had to have, some knowledge or an intimate knowledge of it. And I think, if we remember to the beginning of the articles, what we do the vocabulary exercises, and then I would say, let's talk about anything we don't understand, that there would be the opportunity for us we have the opportunity here to talk about it and here to ask questions. But in your everyday lives, sometimes you will encounter something that you just may need to look up and learn more about as you form these ideas and opinions. So this is related to what we were just saying about the internet. So I'm sure many of you, like myself, to make sure that we were clear on what we were talking about, went to the internet to research it. But I think one of the ideas that we were talking about, and this is why we're here in the classroom, is that what can you trust the information? And this is what the article was talking about, that if we only rely on quick information, on fast information, not doing in-depth research, and that's one of the effects that Google has on us, that it gets us used to quick satisfaction, a quick bite, a quick sound bite, read a sentence, read a headline, and not really read an entire article and really get a deeper understanding of something, then we're forming our opinions on not the full information. Like think of the danger of the single story, right? When we saw that video, right? That the issue with stereotypes was not that they were untrue, but that they were incomplete, right? That if we only know one side of the story or only a portion of the story, we don't have a fuller, more expanded view of something. And so how do we form our opinions based on a lot of information or a depth of information on these little tiny sound bites that we pick up here and there? So going back to the essays, so Carol Anderson's White Rage, right? So we're going to do a couple of things. I want to read a little bit about the beginning, and if somebody volunteers, that'd be great. We'll do that. And then I want to go through, I pulled out from your assignments some of the responses, and you had to respond to 3 things. You had to be able to, do a summary or a quick paragraph on what is the American Civil War. The second one was also on the Brown versus Board of Education. And then there was a line, and we're going to read up until that line. in the essay today, which happens in the first couple of paragraphs. So let me share my screen, and we can take a look at the article. Okay, here we go. Let me make it big so you guys can see it, and make us. Oops. Okay, this is the beginning of White Rage, which is by Carol Anderson, and then here's the end. To make sure that's going to highlight it. And this is the anthology that it's in. I'll make it a little smaller. This is the cover of the anthology, right? The Fire This Time, A New Generation Speaks About Race, edited by Jasmine Ward. And I think in our discussion, I was mentioning that, or in our class, I was mentioning that the title of this book harks back to a James Baldwin essay, and I think in this other part of the introduction, the part that we didn't read, she talks a little bit about that, or I think a little bit of the part that we read, she speaks a little bit about it, but she goes deeper into it in the later on in the introduction. But it's an essay by James Baldwin. We're going to read a James Baldwin one for next class, but it's kind of a response to that, or an update to that, right? And that one, James Baldwin is writing a note to I believe his nephew in it, talking as an older Black man to a younger Black man, almost giving advice, right, on how to live and navigate in this country. And so Jasmine Ward, as we learned in the introduction, we'll go back to that, after we review this week's essay, she was saying, after the Trayvon Martin verdict, she was looking for community, she was looking for a voice. And so what she decided to do was invite a group of writers to come together and to write about, how they felt about race right now. 1 second. Great. All right, let me just make this a little bigger, and then we'll read a little bit of the beginning, and then we'll review the homework assignment. Okay, let me try to make it here, and I'll make us just a little box. So, any volunteers to? 1 second, I just got to go back. All right, I'm just gonna leave it alone. Any volunteers to begin reading? Yeah, Jalan, you want to read? Is that why your hand is raised?
When we look back on what happened in Ferguson, Missouri during the summer of 2014, it will be easy to think of it as yet one more episode of Black Rage ignited by yet another police killing and an unarmed African-American male. But that has it precisely backward. What we've actually seen is the latest outbreak of white rage. Sure, it is cloaked in the niceties of law and order, but it is a rage nonetheless. Protests.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I got it. Okay, there.
Protest and looting naturally capture attention, but the real rage smolders in meetings where officials redraw presidents to dueling African-American voting strength or seek a slash the government payrolls that have long served as source of Black employment. It goes virtually unnoticed. However, because white rage doesn't have to take to the streets and face rubber bullets to be heard, instead, white rage carries an aura of respectability and has access to the courts, police, legislators, and governors who cast its efforts as noble, though they are actually driven by the most ignoble motivations. White rage recruits in American history. It exploded after the Civil War, erupted again to undermine the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board.
Sorry.
Okay. Brown versus Board of Education decision and took
1 second, let me bring it up here.
on its latest incarnation with Barack Obama's ascent to the White House. For every action of African American advancement, there's a reaction, a backlash.
Thank you. Thanks so much for reading, Juan. So that last sentence, right? Like for every African American, for every action of African American advancement, there's a reaction, a backlash, right? And so inside of that sentence, you know, that's the assertion that was part of the assignment that Jesmyn Ward is making, right? That and so when they make the assertion and they make the case, right? What they're doing in the essay is then setting up a system to say, here's how I understand it, and here's how I'm gonna prove it, right? I'm gonna prove my position. So they're saying for every African-American advancement, there's been a backlash historically. So, so one of the things I asked you to look up was the American Civil War, right? Because they mentioned that in that very first section. Let me share my screen again. Right, in this very first section, right down here, she begins, okay, so remember we're talking about like when they infer information, right? So it was really interesting, and this time I wanted to highlight, let's see if it does it. Yeah, here we go. Right, here, this beginning that's here, she goes, when we look back at what happened in Ferguson, Mississippi during the summer of 2014, it will be easy to think of it as yet one more episode, Black rage ignited by yet another police killing of an unarmed African-American male, right? So in this, Carol Anderson, does anybody know, what is she referring to? What happened in Ferguson, Missouri during the summer of 2014? We know that an unarmed African-American man was shot, but do we know what she is referring to? 2014 in Ferguson, Mississippi, Missouri. Does anybody? Okay, I mean, you don't have to, but here's a moment, right? There's enough context to know that something happened. African-American male was shot, and there was a, you know, uprising by the community, by the Black community. So, but for those of you, and I'll say Michael Brown, and then you will understand. And the other one, they named Trayvon Martin, but this one is Michael Brown, right? So Carol Anderson begins that in 2014, when Michael Brown was murdered, it could be easy to think of it as yet one more episode of Black rage, right? That the Black community gets pissed off, and then we take to the streets, and right? But that's one way to look at it. But she says precisely it's the opposite, right? She's saying the opposite of Black rage, she's calling white rage. And she's talking about, and then she's making her case, right? And so she goes to these two historical references toward the end of this page. She begins with she goes, white rage occurs in American history, right? It exploded after the Civil War, erupted again to undermine the Supreme Court's decision, Brown versus Board of Education decision, right? And then it says it also took on, just trying to keep it vague, took on its latest incarnation when Barack Obama's ascent to the White House, right? So it gave us three. One was Civil War, Brown versus the Board of Education. Let me just come back into the class a second, right? So she gives us three reasons, right? At the beginning, Civil War, Brown versus Board of Education, and Obama's election, right? That there was some reaction, right? Some big reaction to those events. Those events were about Black progress, right? The Civil War was, and we'll go into it right now. The Civil War, we know, is a war against the North and the South, and slavery was at the foundation of it. We'll just keep it at that because we'll go into deeper definitions. We know Brown versus the Board of Education is about the segregation, the separation of white and Black schools, right? That there was this idea of separation but equal, that there was a law that was passed that said we could be separate, but we can be equal. And then we discovered that wasn't the case. There was not equality. And then Obama, well, the reason why Obama's took on another, backlash, we could say, is because, he was the first Black American president, and the rising of that advancement caused a reaction. We can say an even deeper reaction, but I think it's just according to the articles, and I think information that we know, that it's been consistent through the years. So let's go to your assignment, right? And I selected 1, 2, and I'm going to give a little more context because I want us to be clear on what we're talking about. So I'm going to share my screen. So here, so here's the American Civil War is the first thing you had to look up, and it was great. I would say that most of the students did a really fine job of responding, and I wrote responses to you in Blackboard. So the American Civil War, this is one response, was fought between the United States and the Confederate State of America. The main point of the war was because of slavery, especially the expansion of slavery into territories that were acquired by the Louisiana and Mexican-American War. And there was a lot of tension between different groups, which caused the war, right? And I just picked one that did a quick encapsulation of it. And then this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, just to give us a little more context, right? That it was also called the War Between the States. It was from 1861 to 1865. So we can give it context, like what is it? It's about almost 160 years ago, 150 something, 160 years ago. It was the succession of the Southern states, and they were South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. They succeeded. They separated from the United States, and they formed their Confederate States of America. And part of their flag was a Confederate flag, right, for these states that decided to separate themselves and didn't want to be a part of the Unions. The Civil War was the struggle between the advocates and the opponents of slavery that dated from the founding of the United States, right? Slavery was around. And this sectional conflict between the northern states and slaveholding southern states, although northern states also had slaves, so we don't want to make it, these are generalizations, but the bigger argument, right? And has been tempered by a series of political compromises. By the 1850s, the issue of the extension of slavery into the Western states, that's what the student was talking about, and the election of Abraham Lincoln was a member of the anti-slavery Republican Party as president in 1860, precipitated the succession of the 11 states. And the states left, there was a civil war. The Union won, like the North won the Civil War. The war effectively ended in 1865 with the General Lee surrenders to General Grant, and it didn't happen on that day completely. It took, things took time. It wasn't like nowadays where we have the internet and all that. And so that's what happened, right? There was this war. We had a war here in the United States between on our own land against our own selves, and really the kind of like the foundation of it was this idea of slavery. And slavery is not just this kind of, I'm going to say immoral or illegal now because it's against the law act, but it was really kind of like a view of how Black people were seen, like their purpose and who they were in the country. So the South wanted to keep it a particular way. The North felt it was, for lots of reasons, let's just go, it was inhumane and unjust. And, those of you who are religious, there's religious about in being unchristian or ungodly, like to treat any human being with that. You have to first admit that they're fully human beings, which is a deeper thing. But anyway, that's the context of the Civil War. Two parts of the country, a group of states separated. They wanted to keep slavery, and the North and the armies were formed, and they fought, and of course they had flags. And so that's part of the controversy on the Confederate flag, is that this flag represented these states that said, we're not going to be a part of the Union, we're not going to be part of the United States, we want to be our own thing because we think so strongly about our ideas and our ideals, and particularly around slavery, which is connected to how you view, Black people, African people that were brought here to work in the fields and other places. And so that's part of the provocation here. I'm showing this image of, this is when the January 6th attack on the Capitol. I'm just showing an image of someone carrying that Confederate flag in the Capitol, right? So it shows that even though that war was lost, right, the Civil War lost, that the idea of bringing the country together was an action that happened, but there's still folks that really hold on to these ideals, right? And so the Confederate flag, that's one of the reasons why I see the Confederate flag on some of the monuments, people have a reaction to it, because it's harking back, or it's connected to a particular point in history, something that we're trying to move beyond. And that was inside of some of your responses, the idea of moving beyond, right? The second one is Brown versus the Board of Education. And before I move on, let me just pause for a second because I can move real fast, but I'm going to slow down. Does anybody have questions about the Civil War and what, somebody, I think everybody was pretty much on point with their answers, but if somebody had a different idea or had a thought that you wanted to share, I just want to take a minute and give space for that. We're good? Okay. Well, since I'm here, we'll just continue with Brown versus the Board of Education, right? And I'm going to look here, I won't share right away, but the student response here was, it was about a landmark decision that was made by the US Supreme Court, in which the US ruled that the laws establishing racial segregation in public schools are unconstitutional. Segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. They were unfair rights in this case, which led to racial segregation. Now, I'm going to say this now, and I've said this before, like it's, as we're talking about these things, right, we put it into our own context. And like last class, someone said something about the phrase is, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And someone said something different, a little differently, that even with all the change, that some things remain the same. And we acknowledge change. We acknowledge change because an example of change is that OSTOS exists, right? And the CUNY public education system exists, since we're talking about Brown versus the Board of Education. So the idea of access and high quality education for all exists, right? I am your professor, a Black Latino from the Bronx is your professor, right? So this progress continues to happen, but we're talking about the areas that need to improve, right? The way progress needs to continue happening. So, so Brown versus the Board of Education, I'll share a little bit of that, share my screen for that. Just so we have a context. So the student did a good job giving us a quick soundbite summary, right, of it, and that's one of the things that Nicholas Carr says that Google is good for, giving us a quick soundbite. This is what I just read. I read this while I was in the classroom, not on the share screen. But just to give it a little more context, it happened in 1954. So if we think of the Civil War happening in 1860s, about the mid 1860s, 1861 to 64. So this is like not even 100 years later. This is 90 years later that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to have, this idea is going to be challenged, right? And this is one of the things that we're starting to break down, this separate per equal doctrine. So that was passed in 1896, right? Which is just about 50 years from the time of the Civil War. 40 years from the time of the 45 years from the Civil War, right? But and it said, that ruling basically said that that it was, as long as facilities that separation, racial segregation was legal, that as long as the facilities for Black people were just as equal for rights, that we can keep them separate, right? So so the Brown that is in the Brown versus the Education is a man named Oliver Brown, who filed a lawsuit because his daughter Linda was denied access to a school, and he said that an all-white elementary school, which technically was legal, but in his lawsuit he said that the schools for Black children were not equal. to the white schools, and the segregation violated the so-called Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is what the student was referring to in their response, which holds that no state can deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws, right? So in the verdict, the Supreme Court did not specify how exactly schools could be integrated, but asked for further arguments about it. So, so although Brown versus the board didn't achieve segregation on its own, the ruling it really gave fire to the civil rights movement in the United States. And in 1955, a year after Rosa Parks refused to give up a seat in Alabama, remember that's one of the states that was part of the Civil War, her arrest started the Montgomery bus boycott, which led to other boycotts and sit-ins and demonstrations, many of them led by Martin Luther King. And then I'm going to jump a little bit in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which if we do the math is about 10 years after the Supreme Court case, right? That 10 years later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There was one before it too, but and there were several acts. And this is just an image of Elizabeth Eckford, one of the famous images of the 15-year-old going to school and people being pretty upset about it. So I wanted us to have a little bit of a context before we go into the third question. And the third question, let me just go to the Blackboard for a second. Here's the assignment, right? So here was, it says Anderson mentions both the American Civil War and Brown versus the Board of Education in her essay. And she writes, for every action of African-American advancement, there's a reaction, a backlash. According to the essay described in one paragraph, what was the backlash against the North's victory of the Civil War? Or was the backlash against the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus the Board of Education? Only pick one historical reference for your response, right? So that was your assignment, to pick one of them and to explain in the context of what she meant for every action, there was a reaction or a backlash. And of course, in the essay, we read up until the first part of it, but the rest of the essay, which is only about 5 or 6 pages, goes into further detail on what that backlash looks like, right? So let's see what you all had to say about that. Here's the third question. All right, one response. When Anderson mentions that for every action of African-American advancement, there's a reaction, a backlash. She meant that every time African-Americans fight for their rights, always has a negative input, or we say effect, right? The backlash they brought was white resentment. The lawmakers in several states created the blackness, sanctioned forced labor, and undermined every tenet of democracy. I'm going to explain that more, but the students beginning to make the case, right? Beginning to take and these were all ideas inside of the article. Here's another one, like for the American Civil War, when the North won the war, people thought that meant the end of racism and slavery, but instead it brought out the beginning of white supremacy and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Definitely one of the points that is made in the article that was a result of the Civil War, right? The backlash against the North's victory of the Civil War did not bring peace, right? That literally comes from the essay. Instead of emancipation brought white resentment, and the good old days of Black subjugation were over, and still anti-slavery still exists and still exists. Legislatures throughout the South scrambled to reinscribe white supremacy and restore the aura of legitimacy that the anti-slavery campaign had tarnished, and effectively criminalized Blackness, sanctioned forced labors, and undermined every tenet of democracy. Yes, this line, this phrase. So just want to remind folks that I know this is an assignment, but when you're using text that's directly here from the essay, that here you would put quotes around it, like I'm doing here, and then we would do some kind of citation if that was what the assignment was calling for. But we haven't gotten to citation yet. We're going to get to that shortly. So, but I'm just giving you a little preview so that you're aware of that. I mean, we did talk about plagiarism, that kind of stuff, but make sure that when you're quoting from a source that you put quotations around it and that you credit the source. Put that the last response, and then I want to get just general responses on what you think of what your student said and any other thoughts around it. And keeping track of time, okay. When the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to separate Black and white students into different schools based on race, it seemed like a major victory for Black children. Unfortunately, this decision by the Supreme Court came with much backlash and rage from white people. Schools were vandalized by mobs of people, bricks were thrown at school buildings, and violence ensued. Shortly after this decision, members of Congress declared war against the ruling by signing into effect the Southern Manifesto. This manifesto allowed the local government to nullify any federal law that the state did not agree with. This led to new legislation allowing the government to withhold funding from any school that abided by the Supreme Court's ruling. Public schools were even shut down, and taxpayer money was then used to support white-only private schools. Okay, that was another. Again, and I can see that a lot of that information came from the article. So any thoughts or reactions to your responses, both your students being able to identify in the article examples to talk about the backlash, and then how do we understand it? Any thoughts on how you understand the sense of what she's talking about? Like, this happens and there's a reaction. You gonna respond, David? If you were talking, we couldn't hear you, David. Well, the reason why I want to make sure that you're clear is because it's leading up to your next assignment. Okay, your mic is down. All right, I hear you, David. Yeah, it just was sounded scratchy. Right, so Victor says the responses are awesome. And yes, I'm just looking at that in the chat. All right, David. Well, David, if you wanted to, while we're giving space for other folks, if you want to like jot it down in the chat, that's you're welcome to do that as well. To put it in the chat. So yeah, so let me couch it and let's begin talking about your next assignment when you think about it. So yeah, so the next assignment, which won't be the next formal essay, is going to be taking the essay that we looked at last week. Is the introduction to Jesmyn Ward. And remember, the assignment that you did last week was about looking the assertion that Jesmyn Ward was making was that over time Black lives have been devalued, right? That there has been, and we spoke about that last class. We looked at the essay, right? I looked at your responses, right? So on the one hand, she's making some of that assertion, right? On the other hand, Anderson's making this other assertion, right? That are related. She's saying, for every advancement, there's a backlash. Like the Civil War happens, woo, the war is won, and some people are not so excited about that, right? And so, those people that are not, it's a backlash. And it's talking about like specifically progress, right? Brown versus Board of Education, woo, great, right? Victory, so that there's equal access to education, regardless of race, right? And then there's a group of people that are like not happy. And Carolyn Anderson, at the end of her essay, that's what she identifies as white rage, right? Because something like this happens and there's a segment, right? So it's not like every single white person in the world, but there is a segment of people that get angry, right? And they, and maybe they don't, well, January 6th was different, but it wasn't necessarily a whole other question, but they don't necessarily take to the streets, but sometimes this white rage manifests itself in laws, right? In different other forms of discrimination, of lack of access, of not being hired, that kind of thing, right? That it exists that way. So, so for your next assignment, right, this will be your next formal essay after, once we finish reviewing all of is Google making us stupid, the next assignment is going to be looking at these two, right? And so what we've been doing so far, the prompts that we've had, like the questions when you have to craft an essay, you've only had to like look at one essay, the prompt goes to that essay, and you write your response based on that essay. But as you will do research projects, as you do more works going forward, not only in this class, but in your academic career, you sometimes will have to look at different sources, right? Different things so that you're able to formulate an idea, but you're using lots of information, right? That would be normal to your living, right? Like if you're, taking medication or you want to learn about a job, that you will get as much information from as many sources to make the best decision and to make the best argument. So in this case, that's what we're going to do. The next essay is going to shift a little bit, right? So we read one short piece, right? The introduction to it, and then we just read a second piece. And so the prompt is going to be asking you a question, and you're going to need both sources to respond to it, right? You're going to have to pull information from both of them to respond to it. So is that clear? I'm going to show you the prompt in a minute because I know that's going to be your next question. Like, what's the prompt? When does it do? Is it clear? So we're going to use the next prompt's two sources. Okay. I'm going to take silence as that and no questions in the chat that you're clear with it. If you're not clear, just remember the metaphor of the child on the bus, on the train. I want to make sure that all of you are on the train and none of you are left, that one little child left on the platform. So, all right. Okay. What? Oh, sure. Do I need to repeat? Yes. Yeah, okay. I will repeat it, Samantha. Okay. All right. You're left on the, okay. Thank you, Taylor. Let me show you the prompt because I think maybe when I show you the prompt, that will help. Yeah, you're left on the platform. Good. Thank you. I love that metaphor because I think when we use that metaphor, I want us to feel that when I say everybody understands, I literally mean everybody understanding. And if we need to slow down so that everybody can get on the train, if I have to hold that door open so that everybody can get on the train, we'll hold the door open, right? So we read one essay, the introduction last week, right, to Jasmine Ward, to this collection, and in it you responded to a question. So your assignment from last week was to respond to that. So you wrote a response to that question, right? And then this week we read Carol Anderson's, and I gave you a series of questions, and the third question was responding to something in the text, right? So you responded to the text through two different prompts, right? So now here's a tip. You could use some of the information you already wrote, but your next response will be an essay, right? It's not going to be a paragraph. That'll be your next essay. I think that's the third formal one that we're doing, right? And let me share the prompt with you, and then we'll talk about again and see if sharing the prompt helps you get on the train and you won't be on the platform. Let me share my screen. Okay. Go to Blackboard. I think it's still on the bottom. I'll move it to the top after class. Right, so here it is. So it's formal essay, right? So respond to the prompt below by Thursday, November 11th, right? So we have, I think like 2 weeks, maybe one. I'm just looking at one. Yeah, two. Yes, so we have like 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks and like a little more like 16 days. And I'm giving you a heads up as we continue to move forward. So you're going to write an essay, and here's the prompt. Let me see if I can make it bigger. 1 second, see if I can zoom in. Yeah, okay, that's better. Let me see if I can go a little bigger. Yeah, okay, great. Here's the prompt, right? Jasmine Ward's introduction to the anthology, The Fire This Time, talks about how Black life has been systematically devalued for hundreds of years, right? Carol Anderson's essay, White Rage, in the same anthology also discusses how Black lives are affected or devalued over history. Identify at least one example from each work and discuss how they view Black lives have been affected over time by historical events. Okay, so again, the first part of it directs you to Jesmyn Ward's, right? That The Fire This Time talks about how Black life has been systematically devalued for hundreds of years. And that was your question that you had to answer in one paragraph for last week's assignment. This week's assignment touches here. Carol Anderson's essay in the same anthology discusses how Black lives are affected or devalued over history, right? And she's talking about that backlash, right? That's what's the backlash. That's what your question was this week. So those two things. Now it's saying, identify at least one example from each work and discuss how they view Black lives have been affected over time by historical events. Okay. That's the prompt. The rest of the instructions is just the stuff we've been doing all semester with setting up the layout, the margins, all that kind of stuff. The header, this is, we'll make this active. This is not here, so we'll make sure you have the MLA first page. We'll have all that. But back to the prompt, right? So this is what the prompt is. So now I'm going to stop sharing, and because the second part of our class we're going to do a little bit of workshopping on crafting the thesis statement for that essay, right? So we're going to look at that prompt, and we're going to work on crafting a thesis statement on it, and we're going to workshop it today. So Nahom, I know Nahom loves to know what the assignments are. Nahom, we will have 2 assignments, okay, before we meet next time. This one is not going to be due for a while. This is going to be your next big writing one. You will have a short one for next class. We're going to read another essay. We're going to read A Talk to Teachers by James Baldwin, and then I will give you one question, the same thing to answer in a paragraph, a response to the article, right? A specific question. Yes, so that was it. So, okay, you got it. No, thank you. He's writing in the chat. So that will be the 2 things. So one thing, and Talk to Teachers, it's go to the course content in the essays folder. It's there. All the essays are there, but that one is there. So if you want to start reading it immediately, it's already up there. All right, cool. Logan got it. So there's more people getting on the train. So for the next essay, I want to check in with, yes, for the next essay, I want to make sure Samantha and David were on the platform. I want to see if they understand the assignment, or if they have questions, or if they're still feeling on the platform. I'm just checking the chat. I'm waiting to hear from Logan. Says he's got it. All right. Right, David and Samantha, when you get a chance, let me know. And then I get it more than before. All right, you get it more than before, or are you good, or you need more information? Your mic's not working. Okay, while we wait for David and Samantha. So what we're going to do is, Victor, our great tutor, who has been cheering in the chat and sharing information as they always do. Yes, saying hello right now, is reminding us that he is not only a resource here. In a minute, Victor, I'm going to have you work with when we do the short exercise on the thesis statement. We'll begin crafting it, and I'll work with the big group, and I'm going to give you just a handful of people to do a smaller workshop so we can talk about it.
Awesome, thanks.
What we'll do is we'll do that after our break, and yes, yeah, it's cool. Don't worry about the technology. I'm responding to folks in the chat who are having yes, so good question. Victor is asking about that. So ask your questions. I mean, again, remember, it's not going to be due to November 11th, but I wanted to get started now. And that's why I want to start, like we did before. I felt that was, I'm seeing the results that if we do a little bit of workshopping of the thesis statement, and you all like sail off with a little bit, at least a better idea of the thesis statement, that we could, that the essay, at least as Samantha was saying earlier, has a structure, and we can follow the structure. We know what the essay is going to be about. So, so David, yes, it's not, David's question in the chat Sorry. David's question in the chat, it's 2 question answer or a combination both in 1 question answer. Yes. So it's a combination. So you're looking at one idea, right? You know, the idea of how, you know, Black people have been affected according to these essays over history, like what historical moments have affected them. I'll give you, and then you're going to be talking about that one idea, but you're going to use examples from both, right? So can someone tell me, like, what's an example of an effect it had from the first essay? I mean, the second one we just talked about too. We talked about, you know, the ways Board versus the Brown versus the Board of Education. We talked about how the Civil War. There's more examples in that. Yes, David, like that. You can take the position of like what the effect, as he's saying, is what made white rage happen. What is white rage? So yes, that's one of the ways it mattered. That's one of the ways it affected, right? And one clear way we talked about, like that last response that the student gave, talking about Brown versus the Board of Education, when they said there were laws, it was at the Southern Manifesto, right? A group of lawmakers started creating laws that would say that there was more to it, that was saying things like, you know, that local people could make decisions, you know, that could contradict the federal idea. And that's something that happens, right? That's the idea as governors and states, and that's why all those things are important of you for you to vote and know the powers of governors and the powers, because they have power over the state. So I won't go into my tangent, but I was almost going to go to a tangent. That's what I'll say a little bit. That's what's going on in Texas with Roe versus Wade right now, with the abortion rights and what's happening. There is this federal Supreme Court decision, but the state of Texas was able to come up to do a subversion to that, right? And so, but that's what that is talking about. In terms of Brown versus the Board of Education, they were specifically saying there were laws passed, that was defunding happening to schools that integrated. They would say if you integrate, they could defund you. So it was all these actions, how those things affected the lives of Black people. So so that's what it is. So so yes, David, is the latter. So you're answering the question and using several examples from the 2 articles. Okay. Any other questions? That was a lot, everybody. So, there's a lot. And thank you for bearing with me. And I know this is this class could be a long class, but yes. So in a few minutes we'll take you know, a break for, you know, the time is at 1:43. All right, so like in 2 minutes we'll take a break, and then we'll come back at 2. And when we come back, we will do a little bit of workshopping of the second part of the essay, answer more questions if there's more questions, because then that should take a break. And, you know, just that activity causes you to think about something differently or see something differently. Yes, so David asked another question, which is great. Great, thank you, Gregory. So David is asking another question, and he's saying, from the articles we read, and the answer is yes. Just from the 2 articles we read, from the introduction and from the white rage article. So that's just a couple more in. Yeah, no, that's fine. Great. All right, Ariel's good. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Excellent. All right, so why don't we do that? Why don't we just take you know, 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll connect. And we're gonna, you know, end a little early today, but we'll come back. I'll explain when we come back. But I think after all this brain work, I think we could use a little bit of stretching. And yes, Miguel, stretch, and a little bit of energy. I'm gonna go get some water, and then I'll see everybody back here at 2 o'clock. said 2 o'clock is 2:02. And good news and bad news, right? Good. For me, it's always bad news when I have to end a little early or alter our schedule. But thank you all for being here at class today. The professor that was visiting, I'll speak a little bit about it. The professors, what we do, part of the practice here at Ostos is that, and other schools, is that classes get observed. And so it's not like an evaluation. It's not like, we'll get in trouble, but basically, professors come. I had to do it for some of my colleagues. I visit their class, and then we have a meeting and we talk about like what was strong, what could be fixed, what, whatever. Some of the challenges, sometimes suggestions come up. So that's what that was about. So they usually only come for a part of they usually come for one full class period, but since this is a double class, the professor that came was only here for the first half of the class, and they have gone off to work on my report, and that's what we talked a little bit about on my break. He and I talked about meeting, and he wanted to know, and I knew we had to meet a little early. That's why I prefaced that earlier, because see when he needed to meet. He has to try to, because he has to get the report in today. I know, because I did another report that I just interviewed somebody before this, got it in. So, but what I want to do is at least get us started. So, so let's see who's back. So Victor, is Victor back? Let me just look in the chat to see who's. Yes, Victor is back. David, you guys always do good. You don't have to worry about that. I think I love this class. I love you all. You're an awesome class. I love reading your responses. I love when you're able to participate in class. So yes, David, I know there is always this like nervousness, but we're good. We're good. And you guys are always wonderful. So he's not evaluating you. He's more like not evaluating, observing me and observing the class. I mean, it's like, but I do what I always do, right? Making sure that when I'm communicating is clear, making sure that I listen to you all, bringing in ideas, but how do we connect it to the writing and to the reading that we're doing? So I always, there's always a little nervousness, but I always also relax, because it's not, that's why in the email I said to you all, I just said, just be yourselves. Don't feel like you have to do anything or you have to be any extra, do anything differently. I think, that's the whole idea. Just let's see how the class is going. So let me just go back to the prompt, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm trying to think of the best use of the time. Probably it'd be better. What I wanted to do was this, but I'm feeling of 2 ways now. As always, I always feel of 2 ways. So I'm thinking I'm gonna do 2 things, right? I think I'm gonna save this workshopping for Tuesday. What I'm gonna do is we'll do the same thing we did last class. So I'm gonna ask you to begin to draft a thesis statement. And so now you have 2 assignments, Nahum. You have one is a thesis statement for this prompt that's up there. So I'm gonna open up another window for that. And then next week, once you've crafted one, then we can workshop it. I think we'll do it that way. Then, and then the other assignment is to read the Baldwin one. So let me just take time to introduce the Baldwin essay. I think we'll do that. And then we'll end, we'll end early today. So I want to speak about the James Baldwin essay. Sounds great. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Victor. Yeah, and then we'll do that. And maybe we'll have a bigger group. Maybe we'll split it up into different groups. And, and I'm trying to think of how to, when. That's a good question, because I'm going to get up from this chair, and then I'm going to have that meeting with him. Then I have a meeting at 3 o'clock with the 3:15 with the chair of the department. And just so you all know, one of the things that I do in my life is, I do creative writing. And so tonight there is a play reading of a play that I wrote. And actually, it's really, I'll send you all the link. You can watch it on Zoom if you want to at 7:30 tonight if you're free. And then if not, if you're interested, I can get you the link to see it. But it's interesting because now that I'm saying this, I didn't think of it, that that in it, one of the characters, James Baldwin, who we're going to read, I'm going to introduce you to now, and we'll read a story about an article that he wrote for next class, is a character. He's inside of the play It's a play that is set in Harlem, it's set in a bar, and it's looking at history, particularly Black history and queer history, how they intersect. And so two characters walk into a bar. It sounds like at the beginning of a joke. But two characters find this bar, and it's not physically there, it's kind of metaphysically there. And they encounter historical figures. So James Baldwin is one of them. There's a jazz singer named Gladys Bentley. There is a poet named Melvin Dixon. There is another poet named Audre Lorde. There is a science fiction writer named Octavia Butler. There is I'm forgetting some people. But anyway, so there's a bunch of characters that kind of come through the bar. So I'm gonna I'll send you all the link. And if you can come, great. It's free, it's on Zoom, you could see it. If any of you feel like you want to write a response to it, like write a paragraph, you could do that. And then we'll just put that as an extra credit thing. And then if you can't see it tonight at 7:30 and you're interested, let me know, because then I'll get you a link and you can just see the reading. And a reading is basically, that's part of the process of developing a play. Like a playwright writes a play and he writes it by himself in his head, thinking a character speaking, and then you bring a group of actors together and then they read it. They read the text. So it's not a lot of acting. There'll be some music, there'll be some lights, but there's like not, it's not a full out play, costumes, or any of that kind of stuff. So that's gonna happen tonight at 7:30. So I'm gonna go from here to a meeting with the professor that was here, to another meeting with my chair, to and then later on make my way to the theater so that I could be there for the reading and organize some things. So I'll try to remember to send it to I can put it in the chat maybe. Maybe just do that because yeah, let's see. All right, let me just organize my head. Let me go back, rewind. So for next, yes, David, yeah. There's many great thinkers, right? And people and essayists in the world. And there are many great American ones. Like some people might, say like some of our founding fathers, maybe of them, depending, doesn't matter, regardless of how you feel about them. Right now, there's a big Broadway show called Hamilton about Alexander Hamilton. And the impact Alexander Hamilton has had. There is, religious leaders, but there's very often great thinkers. And so James Baldwin is one of them. And James Baldwin is an American writer, and he is Black, African-American. He left the US for a while and went to Paris because he just couldn't deal with the heavy-duty racism, and it was just not so powerful as it was here in Paris, so he escaped. But after Kennedy died, was assassinated, and there's a lot that happened in that time period. And shortly after, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and Malcolm X was assassinated, all like within years. He felt like he had to come back to the United States and be a part of the movement. And so he got very involved, and he wrote many essays, and he was really examining who we were as a society in general, but who we were as, who he was as a Black man inside of this society. Now, I'm hoping that this section that we're doing between the last readings and this reading is giving you kind of a little bit of an arc, because I think a lot of us, there's a lot of talk about Black Lives Matter, there's a lot of talk about racism, there's a lot of talk about, and some of us, and from many, if not all of us, it's an experience that we live with, right? That it's a part of our lives, or part of our neighborhoods, or if you leave your neighborhood, you encounter it, right? You get on a plane and you're switching planes in a place like North Carolina, like I have done, and you feel it, right? You switch planes, or you go someplace else that maybe is not like your neighborhood, and you might feel it differently. So he was just doing this examination. And so this little section is giving us a little bit of foundation historical context to what all these ideas and feelings are, right, around race and racism in the United States in particular. So James Baldwin had a lot to say. And 1 second, I'm gonna see if I can play. No, I can't play it. All right. I'll do a quick clip. But maybe I'll do that. I'll send you a clip of him in the assignment. I'll do that so we can take a look at it, and then we'll look at it together when we're together next week. But let's just say that. So James Baldwin is known for essays. He's also known for novels. He's written a bunch of novels, like Giovanni's Room is one of his main novels. Another Country is a very important novel that he wrote. Groups of short stories he's written. He's just written a lot of stuff. I'm starting looking at my shelf over there. Oh, there's White Rage, the whole book that he wrote. And so he wrote a lot of novels. He wrote a play, but he wrote a lot of essays. And his essays are collected in a book called The Price of the Ticket. And it was out of print, but I heard it's back in print. So yeah, it was out of print. It was cost like $500. I bought it, but not for $500. But in it, there was a lot of things that he talks about in terms of race. So I'm going to just say one more thing that what he's trying to do. I'll just give you an example, right? And he's quoted in the idea. And so there's a word that if you live in the ghetto, we hear it a lot, right? And I live in the ghetto, or if you live in an urban area, you hear it a lot, like the word nigga. And sometimes it's spelled N-I-G-G-A, right? You hear rap music, and it's sometimes meant as a term of endearment, like you're my nigga, I love my nigga, that kind of thing, right? But we know that the origin of that word, that it was used, to describe Black people in a derogatory way, like not in a good way. And that's why it's such a lit word, because certain people, want it removed from the English vocabulary. And James Baldwin was being provocative, right? And here's a line of thinking that he shared. He was like, okay, you say this is the definition. This is the definition of what a nigger is, right? A person who is like lazy, a criminal, like unworthy, all those things. All those things that you say are nigger, that's not who I am. I know who I am. And if you say all those things about me, you're wrong. I'm living proof you're wrong, right? So if you're wrong and you created this idea, right, of what a nigger is, then it has to say something about you. It has nothing to do with me, right? Because you made that shit up. It has something to do with you, right? So what James Baldwin was doing, he was shifting the conversation about race, right? Which is kind of what Carol Anderson is doing in White Rage. She goes, you could hear news reports, right? And even during Black Lives Matter, there was a segment of the world saying the riots, right? And focusing on looting, right? And they're saying, look at that. That just shows young Black people angry, right? That story. But we're not talking about like why that exists. It's not like we just woke out of bed and decided to go to wild out. It's all the things that affect us, right? This kind of view. So Carol Anderson is saying, okay, we can look at the Black rage, but why don't we flip it and look at the white rage, right? See what's happening. So James Baldwin was doing something similar. He was saying, all right, this is whole idea of what you think a Black person is, but I'm going to shift that. Because let me tell you, let this Black person tell you what a Black person is. You don't get to say who I am, right? So, so that's the idea of self-determinate. You determine yourself, right? So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that intro. I wanted to play a clip, but you'll see a clip. He has his own fierceness. But this character, this person of James Baldwin, is a character in the play. So I'll make sure I'll send a link to you all, or at least if you go to badbronx.org, that's for the website where it's presented, and we'll do that. So, so for next class, before next class, you'll have two assignments. One is to read the James Baldwin essay, I Talk to Teachers, and then I will send you one question to answer to that. And then to begin crafting a thesis statement for the prompt that we shared in the early part of the class. And when we get back on Tuesday, we'll workshop it. So that's what we'll do. And let me just see, Mahomes, when are you going to post the assignment tomorrow on Blackboard? Yes, why don't I make a pledge and say that tomorrow I will do it. Like by tomorrow morning, I could do it. I'll get up nice and early tomorrow. After I do yoga, I will post all of your assignments tomorrow. So we'll get that done. And then David, what got me into writing, if you don't mind me asking, after you're done explaining what you're explaining. Yes. So yes, so why don't we do that? I will say, thank you all. We're gonna end super early today so I can go to this other meeting. And we've done a lot today. Today was a heavy class. I felt it, but today was a heavy class. We dealt with a lot. And we're also taking a shift and we're doing something different with the next article, but we're still building our writing skills with the prompts, etc. Right? So yes. Okay, that's it. That's cool. No, you're correct, Victor. Originally, I was going to spend this time, but then since I have to leave a little early for that other meeting and everything, I didn't want to crush it in.
Yeah.
That let's just do it. We'll do it next time. Let's have the students write first, make their own attempt, and then we'll workshop their attempts on Tuesday.
I'm excited for next Tuesday. Then I'm very
Yes.
excited.
Yes. So okay. So then I will let you all go. Except, I mean, I'll answer David quickly. But unless you have questions, then you can also wait. But if not, thank you for your time and your attention as always. And look for your assignments tomorrow. Give me a little time. Let's say by noon tomorrow. But I think I'll get up early and do it in the morning before my day gets started and gets busy. So thank you all for your time and your attention and your participation. And I'll see you all on Tuesday. And I'm going to open up. I also said I'm going to open up a thing on Friday so that as you get your Google is making us stupid responses, that if you wanted to meet on Friday, I'll create like a little office hour and you can come in and just work. It'll just, it's free. I mean, not free, but open, no obligation. You just come in and see me. Okay. But I'll just say you in a nutshell, David, and we can talk longer about it. I write because as a kid, I loved reading. And for me, there's something about learning about myself, but learning about other people that I love researching. And so in doing this play, for example, like I knew a lot of these characters, but I learned so much more about their lives in order to create a narrative structure to make them a character in the play. So yeah, I'll say that. I got into writing because I like to read and because I was interested in exploring things, exploring myself, my own identity, my ideas, but also the ideas of others. And so I'll give you an example. Like this summer, I spent time writing a story where the main character was 90 years old, right? So that's a lot, right? To be inside of a 90-year-old's head and body. So I had to do a lot of research, talk to people who are in their 90s, read stuff, imagine it, just really kind of take it in. And it's just something that gives me a lot of pleasure and stimulation to be in the writing creative process. That's my short or maybe long answer of what got me into writing. But if anybody's interested in talking about that, you can do an office hour. We don't have to do it in a class or after class when the class ends, a day that I'm not Tarzan swinging to something else. Then I'm happy to talk more about it. And I encourage all of you to, in addition to this academic writing we're doing, to also think about creative writing. I do both, David. I do some Googling and I do some of the old-fashioned way. That's what we're just talking, like talk to people, listen to music. I mean, documentaries. Sometimes I have a play I'm working on about a musical person, a singer named Johnny Hartman. So since I just spend lots of hours listening to his voice and listening to his music, and that's another way of doing research. Well, I'm glad all of you have stayed for that. But have a great afternoon. And if you have any questions regarding assignments or anything, I'll hang out for another second or two.
Have a great afternoon, Professor, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their week. Enjoy. Stay safe, everyone.
All right. See you around, Professor.
Okay, take care, Logan. Bye, Samantha. And definitely, David, let's stay in touch if you want to talk about that horror movie. I think it'd be cool.
Have a good day, Professor, everyone.
As always, Miguel, thank you.
Professor, you said you wanted to speak with me?
No,
Oh, okay.
unless you want to speak with me.
No, I thought I had heard that, but have a good day.
All right, take care.